Awesome. So we just went live. We're waiting for people to kind of trickle in. Awesome. So I think we can move up from the uncomfortable silence that all of us have been kind of mulling over in. Thanks everybody who's joining in live, as well as everybody who's going to be joining in on demand, because I know taking time out, listening to this 10 a.m. in the morning, it isn't everybody's cup of tea across the world. So I know everybody listening to this on demand. Thank you so much for joining in. We have a great panel today focusing on a theme that we've been tracking for a while. And it basically focuses on while there are so many things we would disagree about in life and in politics, but the one thing we can agree on is that complexity of digital operations, of digital businesses is just expanding exponentially. And the question of our time isn't the fact that complexity is rising and it's getting difficult for us to kind of actively just navigate and be there, but then it's also an opportunity for us to thrive and improve. And to that, we did a nice piece of research along with our partners today and have a great perspective coming on how do we actually thrive in times that are these unpredictable. So I have a great panel with me today. We'll do a quick round of introductions and we'll go on the horn. Just everybody kind of tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and something fun around what did you dress up for Halloween, if anything at all. Nicola, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm Nicola Kinsella, SVP of Global Marketing at Fluent Commerce. But despite our name, we don't actually do commerce. We do distributed order management for retailers and brands globally. And for Halloween, my family had planned a Harry Potter theme. So I was Professor McGonagall, but my son decided that it was going to be a waffle, and my husband decided to be a taco. So I did not fit in at all.
Jasmine?
That is so cute, Nicola. Well, hi, my name is Jasmine Goodman. I'm the head of corporate communications at Contentstack, and I own a Dalmatian dog. So Halloween theme is the dog becomes a spider because you can actually. It's very easy to do a costume, and then the rest is history. So very fun.
Awesome, Michael.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Schultz. I run product and customer marketing over here at commercetools. I've been in the role for about 1.5 years. And for Halloween, we actually all thought we're going to dress up as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, my wife and my 3 boys. And everybody decided last minute to change their costumes. So I just ended up wearing some long fluffy hair like a redneck. So as soon as you leave the US central or the big cities like New York and LA and San Francisco, obviously everything gets very country. So I just put my cowboy boots on and like a toupee and then rocked it with some flannel and some lumberjack outfits.
Nice. Actually, listening to this, ideally we should have had those as our pictures here, because I think that would have made for more greater entertainment. But yeah, especially So a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The first is, like we said, people will listen to this on demand, but we're live. I'm having a little bit of an internet challenge right now. So in case I drop in and off, I request the panelists kind of continue and I'll drop back in. Not that my presence will be missed much, but still. The second is that we keep questions coming throughout. So if you have a question for the panelists, don't wait till the end. This is meant to be a dialogue. Ask us a question, use chat, use Q&A, whatever works for you. So I want to do that. Oh, and I missed mine. So for Halloween, I wanted to dress up as a minion, which is my dream. And I could get close to it with basically just yellow bands, and I have minion slippers. So that's what I did. So onwards and upwards from there. Onto fun stuff. So this is the piece of research that we conducted with our partners here today. The reason of doing this, like I said, is because through our conversations with retailers, clients, and brands, we found that all the things that we had to deal with, pre-COVID, even now, the level of things, so the vectors you're looking at, which are driving the business, the speed at which they're changing, the dimensions are changing so rapidly. We wanted to do a global survey to figure out whether this is isolated, it's global, and then what are the key elements that are driving this change in business. our goal was to basically focus on decision makers and recommenders who are looking at actually have a real view into where the changes are at, but more critically, where do you need to evolve their business to be better prepared for the future? So that was our survey. It's pretty extensive. If any one of you wants cuts of individual pieces of data or how it impacts the business, please feel free to reach out to any of our panelists today. They can provide more details on industry cuts, on data cuts that may be helpful to you and your business. So with that, let's get to the three elements we want to cover off today. The first is rising complexity. Our goal or our thesis from this survey is that complexity of digital operations and execution is increasing exponentially. That's the first thing we wanted to set out and prove, or at least figure out. The second is at what level of preparedness are brands? And this is a two-part, there's a bit of nuance here, which is given the amount of effort and the gumption that retailers had to actually get businesses ready for COVID, and hats off to them, they got a lot of things right. But there are also levels of complexity that we didn't really scale up, which begin to show as the scale of the business continues to grow. So that's the second part. And the third is really around recommendations on given the scenario that we have, how do we actually thrive and grow? So the first is, where do we see the biggest growth from a business perspective? And this chart, so let me explain this chart. This chart says the number of retailers that believe that these elements will increase over the next 12 months. We wanted to focus our attention only over the next 12 months because that's something that we have a greater viewpoint into versus saying 3 years out or 5 years out, because this is here and now, here's something you can visualize. So what we see, and I'll break this down into elements, which is returns are going to be significantly high. So 81% of retailers believe the amount of return that they'll get in their process is going to grow the next 12 months. And most of the other band, which is in the 70% range, is looking at higher tech, higher SKUs, and higher assets. If you break these down into broad components of growth, these are the three core drivers. The first is digital merchandising. How many SKUs do we have online? How well do we represent them? Do we actually have them to actually sell them before we show them on the site? That's the idea of merchandising end to end. And that's both a function of data and availability, but also the visual storytelling that's a part of it. That's the first element. That's the content piece. The second is personalization. And through various surveys and research we've done, we found that that's something that's critically important, because especially because our thesis is that as we get into these inflationary, more difficult times, we think it's going to be a huge marker if you can personalize your business, your offers, your content to drive better conversion and execution. So we believe it's a huge pillar. And the third is store transformation. And we know that there was a narrative not more than 4 or 5 years back where the store was the forgotten child for a retailer. People didn't care much about it. It wasn't really talked about. But what we've seen is that it still continues to be two things. First is a critical part of the omnichannel journey. And the second, it still is a big part of inspiration. We still get a lot of inspiration and storytelling when it comes to the store. So it's a big part of the experience end to end. So these are the three core drivers kind of linked to that. So I know I've kind of spoken at some length. Would love to get the panelist perspective on this. So Jasmine, maybe we just start with you. So if you can talk to digital merchandising, personalization, how are you seeing that as a driver of complexity and retail businesses?
Great question. And I think to your point, I loved your introduction where you said we can disagree on so many things, but what we all agree on is that we're living in an increasingly complex world, not just digital in general, but digital is a very prominent case because we all expect the number of assets to increase. And why is that? Because content is not just king, but king and queen and the rest of the castle. Because if you're putting yourself into your customer's shoes, you really want that personalized experience. Your benchmark is up here, and you don't care whether your internal tools are set up for that or what your problem is as a company. You expect the very best. And that means that every brand that is trying to do well and it is, wanting to please their customers and provide them with an excellent customer experience, digital experience, needs to be at the forefront of exactly that, digital merchandising and personalization. But that also means on the flip side that You need to have the technical capabilities. You need to have the personal capabilities in terms of people and processes, because that is a very different game to play, right? If you're coming from an old world where, you know, it takes you 3 weeks to put a campaign in market, that is not going to work. Not today, not tomorrow, and most certainly not in a year or 2 or 3 down the line. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges. People feel like their technology and their processes are handcuffing them. And I think that's what we're all here for, is to help brands and companies make that easier and be faster to market and really be more successful.
Great. So great perspective around, and obviously the content, storytelling, process, and people. On the 2 elements that you mentioned, Nicola, you mentioned the OMS piece, but digital merchandising and store transformation. If you can talk to the complexity driven just by what we think is a basic thing, I have inventory available. So how does that kind of fit in? Because it seems simple to Jasmine's point, or this should just exist, but it's actually fairly complex.
It is. And when people think about sort of order management, they typically think after the buy button, right? You place the buy button, you're optimizing fulfillment on the back end. But what we're finding more and more is getting the inventory right on that front end, on that pre-purchase experience is super important. But it's really hard, right? Really difficult. And why because you're aggregating data from a lot of different systems. And because a lot of people tend to still use their ERP as that hub. But an ERP is an accounting platform, right? It's great at that, but it's not really good at serving up inventory, accurate real-time inventory, like aggregated view, and so servicing the requests for, thousands, tens of thousands, potentially millions of digital channel requests for that inventory data. And so we're finding that, getting that right at scale is really hard, and a problem that we're enjoying helping people solve.
Awesome. And Michael, as you can look at these 3, you're not going to bring us home with any additional perspective, which is, what here are nuances that we've not talked about right now, in addition to the content, the people, the process, the inventory, the fact that there are multiple calls and, volume of just real-time data availability, all that is just there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what we haven't touched is really kind of like the evolution of commerce, like where have we come from, and where are we going? And then just how you're scaling. And I'll answer the first part, which is really the evolution of like, where have we come from and where are we going now? And for me, it's really a matter of, we've known and come to know, and the market has educated all retailers, whether they're B2C, B2B, or any other sort of business model, that you have to buy this sort of black box, this monolithic legacy solution. And what we're seeing is we're moving very, very fast to a very composable, a modern tech stack, a tech stack that prefers and shines because of the best of breed selections. So it's no longer you're going to a big legacy vendor and you're getting everything out of one hand. You're really sort of picking and choosing. And a lot of people think, I have to work with all these different vendors. And the reality is you're probably doing that already anyway, because your legacy system is not up to par to some of the best of breed solutions out there. So you're adding a CMS, you're adding an OMS, you're adding all of these things because the legacy vendors don't do that. So I think there's a different shift or paradigm from a technology perspective, but also from an architectural approach that is very, very different. And in an ideal world, when businesses are really successful, they're sort of not only looking at the technology and the architecture and the approaches within that, but they're also adopting that agile and nimble mindset for their businesses, and sort of maybe like productizing functions or teams. Like it's no longer about business versus IT, it's business and IT working as one unit, and maybe even in a productized function there.
Awesome. I will put a pin on a couple of things around the evolution of commerce, and also the thing that you kind of refer to is, what does the architecture of the future need to look like, right? To the point that Nicola mentioned about millions and millions of calls on the inventory, and then Jasmine's point about collaboration. What are the right kind of architectural standards? Because when looking at not just growth today, but ideally platforms or overhauls to kind of support the growth for the future, which is commerce and channels that we own, content that we own across the board. So we'll put a couple of pins into kind of getting to that. The next things I want to kind of prop up here before I get you guys to comment on this is this. And you referred to it. The first was, and I'll tell you how to read the chart, was what percentage of retailers expect growth to happen. So for instance, what we saw in the prior chart was 80% of retailers expect the amount of their product returns to increase. They expect the amount of product returns to increase by about 23%. That's how you read this chart. And to the point that kind of Jasmine mentioned, you're looking at close to a quarter increase in the number of digital assets that we have and that we can manage. Now, in any sense of the word, given the fact that I'm sure we know people working in e-commerce and business, this is a lot of content to manage, because it's not about just having an image. It's about, what does it look like? The right tag behind it, the metadata, and to actually use it and, actually use it to drive either better customer engagement or conversion is a significant challenge. So this is kind of just adding to the level of things we need to manage with the overlay of having limited bandwidth, skills, and people responsible to do it. So are we adding 20% more headcount to deal with this? In most cases, the answer is still no. So which is why it's not just the velocity, the speed, and the quantum of this is matched by limited team and people, which is why the element of having better tools, process collaboration becomes critically important. And that's why we get to this chart, and I'm going to ask the team to kind of comment on this across 3 different dimensions that we talked about. What this chart tells us is on the x-axis is the high percentage of retailers believe that these elements are going to increase, and the growth is the chart that we saw, which is the percentage of growth that we expect over this year. So for example, digital assets, looking at 70% of retailers expected to grow the next 12 months, and it's the highest area of increase. So I'm going to come back to the 3 elements that we chatted about earlier, and Nicola, I'm going to lead with you, which is how, and I'll borrow the term that Michael used, which is around evolution. How do we think the store experience of the future changes, given this is happening? You're looking at obviously product returns, greater SKUs, of course, a great omnichannel presence. How do you see the store itself evolving?
Yeah, so, the store is going to change in several ways, right? So we've got more e-commerce orders now being fulfilled from stores. So you've got to find that balance between the online and the offline experience, making sure that your store staff have the tools and processes they need in place to fulfill online orders, but also ways, and potentially that's advanced sourcing logic that lets you route orders based on how many open orders are at a store, or how many like total orders are going to a store, online orders are going to a store every day. So you can find that balance and protect the in-store experience for your in-store shoppers. You also need to make sure that you're servicing accurate inventory online, because there are a lot of shoppers that still like to go online and check in-store stock before they go to the store, even if they don't actually make the purchase in store. So that's a really important aspect of the experience. And then when it comes to returns, we're seeing a few different strategies, right? Some people are outsourcing returns and sending to a third party for packaging up, for whether it's sale to sort of a discount retailer or similar. Others are managing those returns in the store, and they have separate sort of sale rack. Others are returning returned items to a central sorting facility. But maybe you want to put sort of quality checks in place. Maybe the way you route that inventory is different based on the outcome of that quality check. So there's a lot of different sort of moving parts in those processes that retailers have to figure out as the volume of returns increases.
Awesome. And I think the underlying factor there is, let's assume X% of our transactions are just pickup or delivery or other transactions. Then how do we look at the store layout, the transition, drive-through lanes, all of that changing, which is, to your point, it'll just transform, physical vectors, obviously work distribution, inventory availability, all of that across the board.
Yes, definitely. And we've got some retailers, while they used to have a tiny little table in the back room, now they're, for store fulfillment, because the volume was low. Now they're like, wait, we need to rethink our store layouts and create a dedicated space to fulfill online orders. Because we're actually seeing, certain retailers and brands looking at potentially moving away from distribution center fulfillment and just trying to fulfill all orders from stores, which is a big shift in the way of thinking.
Yeah, that's great. And Michael, I'm going to come back to you, because you teed this up in the prior question, which is the evolution of commerce. Now, what do you see the evolution of commerce as being? Is it more channels? Is it deeper into more channels? How do you see the kind of tea leaves folding around? how will we be shopping in the future?
Yeah, I think the short answer is we don't know, but what we do know is how to get prepared for anything that may happen or any of the emerging channels that may pop up. I mean, over the last couple of years, I mean, even just recently, like the last 2 years, we've seen how TikTok really sort of hit like the 2 billion user mark. We have shoppable Instagram, shoppable video, more in-store, new tech store, new store tech effectively. In-car commerce, we have NFTs, crypto, metaverses, and sometimes these are just effectively payment methods or almost like loyalty type approaches, but in some cases these can also be converted into a channel. And I think the question is just like, what channels should you put your bets on, and how can you support it? And I think that's where this headless approach really comes in, because from a headless commerce perspective, the touch point or the channel or the storefront is sort of really up to the brand or the merchant or the retailer, and it's where they want to put their bets and how they want to sort of define and create that experience. And I think what you need to do that with is you need a super amazing, powerful, robust, and scalable commerce engine in the background, and then you can power all of these channels. And then where the complexity comes in and the scalability aspect of it comes in is really, how can you support those, or should you even be supporting those? And I think that's more of an idea of like, how can you be future ready? How can you sort of future proof your business? So whether it's inflation, like, I don't know, any sort of issues around like war and conflict, whether it's supply chain issues, whether it's pandemics, like you can build out a very modern tech stack to be prepared for whatever life throws at you.
Awesome. And Jasmine, I'll go to you for the thing that's probably the most difficult here, which highest growth, way more complexity. How do you look at managing this quanta of content that you saw? How do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, and I want to tie that back into two fantastic points that Michael has made. One is, I love the strategy component, because what you want as a business, you want all options. You want to be set up in a way that if you decide tomorrow that NFT is the thing that you want to go after, you can implement it tomorrow. The worst thing that can happen is you have a fantastic idea, or you're really sold on it. This is the channel that you want to be in, and then you call IT, and they're like, "Yeah, well, we're on a monolithic suite. We don't know. We'll figure out how long it'll take." And then they call you back 3 days later, and they're like, "Yeah, it's going to take 6 weeks until we can implement something that could potentially enable us to be in this channel, but maybe it won't work." Nightmare, right? It makes my skin crawl or thinking about it like there, but that's how businesses operate these days. Let's make no wrong assumptions about that. That's reality. So I think, that is super important, that you are set up in a way from a technology and from a mindset perspective that enables you to be very flexible. Headless, that Michael mentioned, is exactly what you're looking for, because in our world of composable architecture, and Contentstack is really adamant about that, we connect to your toaster oven if you force us to. Because you should have choice, you should have freedom, and you should be able to execute very quickly, because tying it back into the growth portion of it, we expect the people that you ask expect 25% and more growth in terms of total number of digital assets that they will needing to manage. Nobody's going to hire 25% extra staff. So, how can technology help? How can technology set you up in a way that frees you from the restrictions that you're experiencing today? How much can we automate? And we have a fantastic automation hub feature that is brand new and will become more popular very shortly, where we take away the pain of doing a lot of the things manually to enable you to be creative and to strategize And to not fight with IT about, hey, I need an update on this content piece, or I need you to fix this typo on the website, which is also still reality, right? For us, it seems like that's long gone, but that's actually reality. So enabling the marketing and the IT side of the house to really work seamlessly together versus, you know, them sort of everyone doing their own thing and holding each other back. I think that is really what we strive, all of us strive for as individual companies, but also together when we come together and create solutions for brands, is to really take that burden away from you and set you up for creativity and being able to strategize and execute on that.
Thanks. So two good takeaways for me. The first is to get away from the shackles of tech debt and repetition. I think automation is a great way, especially if you want a higher throughput of assets of any kind. The second, and I blame you for that entirely, I'm really craving a well-toasted IoT-based bagel. If I could get that, I think that would be awesome, based on the example that you gave. So a quick recap for everybody kind of so far, right? So what we've talked about is the core elements of complexity and what's driving those. And what we've seen is that the key elements, and that's where we get to next, that we can look to shift the balance, is that we won't get more resources to deal with what we have. And the elements of the core tech platforms and tools, from the ease of availability, ease of use, automation, are just fundamentals that we need to kind of just be successful, right, in the current way of home. The thriving part is where we incorporate these with best practices and learnings across areas, and which is what we're going to get to next. So this is the other chart. So we looked at what's growing, which is, if you remember to the chart on the left, digital assets, a high growth area, product returns, high growth, online SKUs, high growth. So the chart on the quadrant on the top left is where we're seeing the highest growth of capabilities. And the x-axis gives us how effective retailers are. The way to read this chart is that while most retailers believe that the growth of digital assets is the highest, so 70% believe it's going to grow, it's 24% year-over-year growth, very few of them believe they're actually effective in managing it. Now, this to us is the area of where retailers are struggling and are finding it difficult to scale. And these map to the elements that we've talked about earlier. The reason why we think this is critical is if you look at the best possible growth scenario or the muted growth scenario that we're talking about right now, these are critical elements of execution. If you don't deliver on these basics to what was mentioned by a few of the panelists, we risk losing our customer or shopper, because the amount of room we have to err or make a mistake before a customer decides to go to somebody else that may have a SKU available that they can see on their site, or for whom product return was easy, or any of those elements, is just becoming narrower and narrower. Which gets us to this, which is why are we not able to do it? And this is, again, like I said, before we started, I gave kudos to retailers to actually doing a great job during a very tough COVID season, with, of course, the workforce, with tech, making that happen. But then as you look at scaling the business and figuring out what we need to do today, these are the top challenges that are kind of stopping us from a progress perspective. And what I'm going to do is, and I'm not going to go through this list entirely, I'm just going to get each of the panelists kind of comment on these one by one. So let's start with you, Jasmine, first, which is, are you surprised by any of these? Is there anything here that you think came as a you weren't expecting, or it could be either it's not there, or you think it's too high or too low?
And you know what? The majority of what's on here makes perfect sense, right? And it's exactly what we're seeing. Nicola, made some excellent points about store inventory and that's also from the customer side exactly the problem, right? I don't care about your store inventory process. What I really don't understand is if you tell me it's going to be there and it isn't, then I'm going to be mad. And it's that easy, and that's a need that we all need to satisfy. So, this to me makes perfect sense. What I'm a little surprised to not see is actually the technology portion of it to a degree, right? Because nobody's saying, well, there's lack of good tech for managing online orders and returns. but nobody, or what hasn't made it onto this overview is the overall tech stack, right? The environment that you're operating in. So that is what I find surprising, because you can't just look at any one of those items. You need to take a step back and, you know, take a look at the full picture and start implementing changes step by step to move into the right direction. And I'm hoping that that's what people are doing and we're just not thinking of when we ask them. But that's what I'm surprised hasn't made it on here.
Got it. Nicola, you know, because, you know, to the point about the whole picture, I know, you know, you have a global vantage point and, you know, you travel all over trying to, you know, meet retailers. How do things, you know, differ by markets or geographies? Are the challenges similar? Is there something that props up more for, I don't know, Asia or you know, Europe? Curious to get your perspective on how does this rank across like a global view?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at like, you know, preferences, customer preferences, right? You've got, I think it was 66% in the US and UK and 68% of customers in Germany, and then up to 71% in Australia, you know, are looking to check inventory, right? That store inventory. Going to the store, even if they're not, you know, they're not buying online. And then you've got the digital version of that, right? Which is if you're showing something of in stock when it's not, you end up overselling. So you're paying to sort of grab that order, paying for the advertising potentially to send people to your website to begin with, and then someone's placing that order, and then they're getting an email a few hours later saying, "Oh, sorry, that order's cancelled," and then they end up calling the call center because they're, you know, really upset about it. So you've not only got the cost of processing the order, you've got the lost sale because you're having to refund it. You've got a really annoyed customer who's going to go to Trustpilot or something and leave you a bad review, and you've got your call center costs going up as well. So it impacts so many different parts of the business. I'm not surprised to see sort of this inventory problem bubbling up to the top. It's probably coming from a lot of different areas.
Got it. And Michael, I'm going to ask you, because, you know, you talked about the evolution of commerce, you talked about how we think we're going to be, you know, in the future headless and so on. Do you see these challenges change based on, you know, retailers' maturity? If somebody is more mature, would inventory not be that big an issue for them? Would something else be higher? Curious to know if maturity from an omnichannel perspective has an impact in terms of these challenges.
Yeah, I think even the word or the terminology of maturity is an interesting one and one we encounter every day. And I always ask myself, like, what does it really mean to be digitally mature? Does it mean I like to build more things? Like, am I into Legos and just want to build everything like myself? Or like, what does it really mean? Or have I been around a certain amount of time? Is my tenure over 10 or 20 years? Like, what does it actually mean? What I see happening is that it really depends, and I know it's a funny statement to make, but it really depends on where you're coming from, whether you're in B2C or B2B. I think maturity can help you to understand what has worked and what has not worked in the past, but it doesn't necessarily always help you to figure out what is the right next step. And I think having a lot of maturity and having that tenure can also mean that from a technical perspective, you have a lot of tech debt. You're chained. We've used this term chained and handcuffs and those sort of terminologies in the past few minutes. But I think you almost have a lot of baggage that you have to deal with. So maybe that is actually holding you back more than what the opportunities are. So I think.
So let me ask a follow-up there, and you know, it relates to what we chatted about. And by the way, quick heads up, I'm going to ask a similar question to Jasper, Nicola. So based on this, what you said, what are best practices that you've seen so you can actually scale commerce? Because you're clearly saying that's a challenge. So is there something that we know we should do? If I do these three things, at least I have a better shot at scaling it, something that improves our odds of success.
Yeah, I think what I've seen be very successful is start small, test and fail fast. Like, especially when you're coming from some of these legacy solutions, and I'm just focusing on kind of like the commerce space now, like what we would call a strangler approach, but just kind of like chipping away at the monolith. That seems to be working really, really well, irrespectively of like B2B or B2C. Like, you start small, maybe you just start with your product catalog or your PIM, or maybe you want to start with something more challenging, which is more kind of like the cart order checkout kind of like aspect. But I think starting small and then growing that, I think is one way from an actual migration implementation perspective. I think from a other sort of scaling perspective is scaling just kind of like on peaks and seasonality. If you want to go down that angle, I think the fact that these like new wave kind of like commerce platforms or commerce portfolios are SaaS offerings, and therefore are first-class citizens in the cloud. They're built in the cloud and for the cloud. Scaling is actually not an issue. Like, we don't even talk about Black Friday anymore because we don't test, we don't do anything different. We are built in the cloud, and I've worked with and for retailers that would, I don't know, have a code freeze in latest October and maybe even start prepping in August. We don't even think about scale or scaling up that much anymore because it's just a function of the cloud and being in the cloud. And I think last point to sort of close this off, scaling in terms of like storefronts, I think the ability to have multiple storefronts, to have that optionality that Jasmine was talking about, I think that's an opportunity, but it's also a curse because obviously you have to manage that. But given you're basing everything on a very solid and robust back end, you can support all of these different channels with the same catalog, with the same commerce engine, with the same order APIs. All of that is very, very easily scalable because you're working off the same foundation, and I think that actually makes it easier. And you can just start out with one channel, and like to my earlier point, just start small and grow.
Okay, awesome.
Totally, and I would
so go for it.
I would totally second that, because and I think that here's two important things for our participants. Headless is really key. And don't be fooled. There's a lot of vendors out there who are trying to sell you that they've moved to the cloud, but it's not headless. It's not the real headless. It's, you know, they've taken what they were doing on premise and they've put it into the cloud, but that is not that's not the essence of headless. To Michael's point, you know, if you are really truly in the cloud in a headless environment, you don't need to stress about Black Friday and about the number of API calls that your system needs to be able of handling, because we're talking about a real problem. If your system isn't scalable and doesn't scale and crashes on one of those days, we're talking about potentially millions of dollars of lost revenue, plus the upset customers, plus the call center calls, plus. It's like a domino effect of escalation, which you really don't even want to be close to. So I think that is really important. And if you're not sure, because it's really hard to figure out what's the real deal and what is just labeling itself as something that you're looking for, find a partner that helps you navigate that landscape. We at Contentstack always say, we won't let you fail. You know, find partners on eye level, like all of us here on a call, that are going to be there with you all the way. It is not easy to move to a composable architecture if you're on a legacy system today, but it's also not as complicated as you think. To Michael's point, and I love that earlier, all you need to do, quote unquote, is start small. Pick one piece that is a tremendous pain in the ass, excuse my French for you today, and start there. And whether that's search or whatever it is, pick one thing, build a POV, build it quickly, make the case also internally. If your board has a hard time understanding why you are trying to convince them to go that way, make a case, build a proof point, pick one thing, start small, build a POV, prove that you're moving in the right direction, and then slowly but surely, chip by chip, you know, make that a journey, not a one haul, mad, crazy situation for everyone.
Totally agree. We see the same thing, right? Start with your biggest pain point, right? Is that your inventory? Is that your store fulfillment from our perspective, right? Is that order orchestration? Like where is the biggest pain? And let's start there and let's fix that problem. And then just tying back into Michael's, comment on scale, you're a vendor of distributed order management who are, oh, how many orders can you process per second? And it's like, you're asking the wrong question, because, I might be, under, say, bot load during a sale, getting doing 170 orders or something a second. Well, that's great. But, in the meantime, in the background, we might have to process 1,700, product availability, like in stock, out of stock checks, per second, which is, 10x that volume. And then you might in the super background be processing like tens of millions of inventory position updates coming in. So when you're thinking about scale and digital commerce, it's not what's at face value that's important. It's all the other stuff that's happening behind the scenes in terms of scalability that's really important.
And I know we've been asking questions throughout, but are there any questions or thoughts that, as we've been having this chat, that you guys thought of that I didn't give anybody the ability to kind of ask, but anything that kind of came up as you were thinking, oh, this is really interesting? Any questions that you want to frame, Nicola, Jasmine, or Michael, but to the other panelists?
So I have we've had a quick calls recently with some prospects, and this one topic's been coming up, and so I wanted to get your sense. I'm going to throw out a prediction for 2023. Love to get your take on it.
Oh, nice. Let's do it.
No, so we're hearing a lot more that, I'm spending all this money on ads to send someone to a page where they're either it's out of stock, or they can't, having to accept the order and then cancel it because the item's not, able to be found. So I'm going to predict that retailers and brands are going to start to look at, how do I make my advertising inventory aware? How do I, extend beyond just the traditional sort of shopping channels, but to the other channels as well, and other ones that I'm not thinking of.
Yeah, I think that has a very high probability. Yeah, no, that's again, in a increasingly complex digital landscape, that's exactly what you need to do, right? You need the individual parts to talk to each other in a very broad sense, and that will only work if you are really looking hard at how you can create a better tech stack, create one that actually solves for your problems and not creates additional ones because the systems don't talk to each other, or they don't talk to each other in the right way, or you're not asking the right questions. And then again, you need a partner that will help you ask the right questions, right? Let's all have more of those conversations and then share the outcomes. I think there's still, many brands are have a tendency to think in closed shop kind of terms. They on the one hand, they don't want to share how they do it, but they would be dying to learn how others are doing it. And I think that's the beauty in a composable world, architecture wise. There's nothing wrong with sharing. I've never seen two identical technical solutions to the same business problem, because everyone is different, and there's no harm in sharing the approach. And I think if we can all share more and be more open about it and have open conversations about, hey, this works for me, this doesn't work for the other party, but this one over here works for this, we could all be better, and everyone wins, nobody loses.
Absolutely agree. It's not just sharing the value, so much of the value, right, in this digital agility is being able to provide that differentiated customer experience. No one's going to want to do it exactly the same way you're doing it. They're going to want to do something different, but they're going to want to learn from other practitioners and other peers, definitely.
And maybe it's
Michael, you came
off
mute.
Oh.
Sorry, Jasmine. I just saw Michael came off mute, so I thought he wanted to respond as well.
Yeah, sure. Happy to go. I think my thought was just, I think we're still in early stages of the mainstream adoption of the terms of like headless and composable and things of that nature. I think we've come a long way. I think especially the Mach Alliance has really helped to represent kind of like this new paradigm shift in a very independent form. But I think if you truly sign up to it and if you truly believe it, I think there's obviously the headless notion where you decouple front and back end, but I think the beauty around composable is that you're not just decoupling two things, you're decoupling the entire stack, and that gives you such enormous power. And in that composable nature, everything is replaceable. And I think a lot of people think, oh, you still have the commerce platform as the base and as the foundation. And that's not unnecessarily true or false. It's just everything is replaceable, everything is expendable, right? And to Jasmine's point, like you might have a snapshot in time where this works for you and this doesn't work for you, but as we encounter these new challenges, our businesses evolve, and therefore you can easily replace things that have worked in the past, and there's no harm or foul in that. It's just you're evolving as a business. And I think this composable approach really sets you up for success and sort of really has your back and sort of like all the challenges that might come your way.
So let me play the devil's advocate a bit, and Jasmine, I'll go to you with the question. Based on what Michael said, and you referenced it earlier, this whole notion of obviously, Mark, is it just not a buzzword? Is there true business value here? Because we hear a lot about headless and new architecture, and Elon Musk is on Twitter turning off microservices by the second. So are these all buzzwords? Where is the true business value for Mark in addition to just tech? Like, how do we realize it? Is it true? Is it real? And how do we convince people just not a fact?
Yeah.
So because I'm sure you're hearing that as well, which is is this actually real, or I've heard this again? So what's the reality?
Oh, for sure. And full disclosure, and full disclosure, I'm the VP at the Mock Alliance, so I have a biased point of view. But you know what, we've been getting that question from the very beginning. So the Mock Alliance is a young endeavor. It was founded in March of 2020, right before or right when the pandemic hit, and I think that accelerated a lot of the change that we're seeing now, because who knows if it would have grown as quickly and become what it is if that hadn't been the case. Now, the question that we've been getting from the beginning is, oh, is this just another marketing thing, or is there beef to the bone? And it's fair to ask, because it's could be, right? There's so many terms, so many acronyms. Here's another one. But what I loved is we put on our first thought leadership conference in May this year in London, and Ian Rosen from Harry Rosen got on stage and actually said, you know what, to this day, and he was, of course, being humble, but he said, I don't know what an API is. I don't have to, and I don't need to. What I care about is that my business improves, and that my business is able to do things better, more quickly, more cost effective, with increased time to market. That's what I care about. I care about business benefits. How the technology gets me there is not so important to me, but I care about the effects that it has. So Mock is definitely, and maybe just a second, because I'm not sure if everyone in the audience knows what Mock is. Mock means microservices, API first, cloud native, and headless. So those are the four criteria or components that we look at when we talk about a Mock architecture or a composable architecture. So it's more than just headless, to Michael's point earlier. But really, what we should all care about more than any acronym is the benefits that the business is going to be able to derive from that. And we are 100% convinced that is the future. And the actual tagline for the Mock Alliance is, the Mock Alliance advocates for best of breed composable architecture, and our mission is to enable brands and companies to be future fit. And I think we touched on it briefly. Any company that is growing, and especially companies that are growing quickly, change all the time. They are not the same company in 6 months than they are today. And in 12 months, they're not going to have the same needs as in 6 months. So every 6 months, you're basically talking to a new customer almost, because the asks and the needs have changed. So, and you have no idea. If we're really honest, none of us have any idea what business is going to look like in 5 years. But what we do know is that it will change. So our responsibility is to set our customers up in a way that enables them to be flexible to whatever their choice be, come 6 months, come 12, 18, 24, anywhere down the line, enables them to be successful and do what their strategy asks them to do. And not be handcuffed, again, to use the same image, not be handcuffed by their technology saying, yeah, we'd actually like to do this. So sorry, we're unable to. And then, your competition is like, well, thank you for this opportunity. Sweep in, take your market share, and could potentially put you out of business. It goes that quickly. So really, I think that's the bottom line there. And it's if you want to judge by the number of companies that have joined the Mock Alliance over the course of these 2 years that we're talking about, we're at more than 70. And those companies are in size from anywhere between small startup to Google Cloud. AWS was one of the latest joiners, and anything in between. So if you want to take market reaction to the Mock Alliance as an indicator, this is the future. That's where we're heading. So, I would encourage everyone to start reading up and start having conversations and, start being curious and see how it applies to you. I love Michael's maturity question or explanation. You don't have to be incredibly digitally mature, whatever that means, right? But be curious, start asking questions, start probing your IT team or your marketing team or both of them for ways to make the corporation better, to come together as a team, and then ultimately to put your business in a better position to thrive.
Nicola, I saw you go off mute a couple of times. I thought you had something to say.
Yeah, no, it just reminded me actually of a quote coming out of NRF at the beginning of 2022, and it was from the Best Bud's CEO, Corey Barry, who said, versus, and I wrote it down because I was just trying to find it because it was particularly poignant at the time, right? Versus trying to have the perfect and specific answer. The staff and I are focused on the agility it continues to require based on situations that are changing almost more rapidly than we can predict. And I think that sort of, helps sum up why we're doing this, right? To give people the digital agility they need so that they can respond quickly and they can thrive, in this complex and rapidly changing environment.
Awesome. So with that, we kind of put everybody on the spot. It's great, I can do that. Is really, given the fact that, we perhaps are in for a downturn, at least definitely a tricky macroeconomic climate. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'd love to get everybody's perspective or recommendations on the top 3 areas that retailers and brand need to focus. And I'll follow that up with a little something. Actually, let me give you a little bit of time, right? And I'll tell you the order beforehand, so you can be prepared. You don't have to say, or even give us a heads up. We'll go Michael, Jasmine, and Nicola in that order. A quick recap of things we've talked about so far. What we've agreed on, of all the things we disagree upon, is the fact that the level of complexity, the level of change that we're in for is rising, exponentially. It's not just the quanta of change, but also the different vectors of it. So in terms of, if you just think of content, the different elements of it, the metadata, not just the volume of it. What we also realize is that all of this change is broadly focused around 3 core dimensions. The first is how we look at and sell product, digital merchandising. How do we look and improve and personalize the shopper experience, personalization? And how are our stores and the store experience changing in physical layout and everything to kind of meet the needs of the new shopper? With this, our core challenges continue to be things that have scaled to a level that we can't keep up. Inventory, store availability, code content and assets. And to the point that Jasmine Michael brought up is the reason why you see these is because perhaps how we are structured, how we are architected, and how we're built to serve isn't where it needs to be. And the way forward is a lot of automation, upgrading our tech, and making sure things that are important to the shopper, the consumer, to Nicola's great point, like inventory, make it inventory aware. When you want to, if you have something, promote something you have versus something that you don't. And the most important part, and I'll use technical terms for that so people don't get confused, is focus on things that are a pain in the ass, because that's where you need to kind of get started, versus looking at boiling the ocean. So that's a summary of where we've been so far. You can get cuts of the data, the report from any one of us. Please reach out. And I'll now go to Michael, Jasmine, and Nicola in that order for what are the big top 3 things we need to focus on as we head into 2023. Michael?
Sure. I think the number one thing to focus on for me is the flexibility. Like, does your current environment, your current organization, and your current tech stack allow you to be flexible? That's number one. And we talked about kind of like the approaches to take there, but I think that would be a good like litmus test or pulse check. I think the second one is around agility and scale. Like, if you answer yes to kind of like focus area 1, can you really take that nimbleness and agility to respond to these market changes? I think depending on your definition of a recession, we're already in it or we're about to go into it. And what does that mean? What does it mean for supply chain? What does it mean for prices, inflation, things of that nature? So how can you respond to that? And depending on that, how can you use that and scale out your businesses? Are you scaling in different markets, in different geographies? Are you scaling different brands? Are you scaling different touch points and channels? So I think that's something to consider. And the third one is really around cost and TCO. Obviously kind of like almost interchangeable, but really understanding like what have you gotten yourself into from a tech stack perspective, right? Because I think a year ago, or maybe 6 months ago, or maybe 5 years ago, a major investment was taken to build out the commerce platform that a retailer or a brand or a merchant is sitting on. Is this still meeting your customer needs? Is that giving you the flexibility, agility, and scale that you need? And what are the other components that you've added on and bolted on? And sometimes I think realizing that that someone might be costing out a few things too much, or that you're overpaying or double paying because maybe you're sitting on a black box that actually comes with a CMS, but you still went to a best of breed CMS vendor and added that on. So I think it's like everybody should sort of watch their pockets in a way, in a good way and in a meaningful way, to say, you know what am I actually looking at from a total cost of ownership here, and move forward this way. I think that would be my recommendation. Like making conscious decisions is I think what I'm saying.
Awesome. Jasmine?
Very quick, the three things that brands need to focus on to thrive is content, collaboration, and customers.
Awesome. Wait first. Nicola, bring us home.
Fine, I love it. I was torn between saying inventory, and inventory. But if I really going to look at it, like, getting that right is really important, because then you can start optimizing your fulfillment based on that data, right? Not going beyond, is it the closest, location to the customer, and looking a little bit beyond that and saying, well, is it the closest location with the oldest inventory or the most inventory? But in order to be able to do that, you have to, or based on sort of SKU velocity, in order to be able to do that, you have to have the inventory data first. And then lastly, you don't have to do a big bang approach anymore, right? Find your biggest pain points, address those pain points, and then even use the ROI you're getting from addressing those pain points to fund the rest of your digital transformation projects.
Awesome. So thanks a lot. I love the diversity of answers there, because I think they cover off most aspects of what we think are fundamentals we need to kind of, compete and then thrive. So I want to thank all of you for taking time to join us today, having this lovely discussion. I want to thank everybody who's joined in, can listen to us live, and all those who will on demand. You can find the report and download it, or reach out to us. Again, thanks all of you for joining in. Have a great rest of the week. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
it. Thank you. Bye.
All right, so we are done. I'm gonna close it now. Thank you so much. That was fun.
Thank
Worked
you.
well, I thought. Yeah, and I didn't freeze. Hopefully a lot. Hopefully none at all.
No,
Yeah.
Got lucky.
all good.
Yeah, I was moving around just to make sure that I was moving on my screen, and I could make out that I was moving. So it was like a weird thing. Wait, am I live? Am I live? Am I live? It was.
Couldn't tell. It's all good.
Thank you so much. Thanks,
Thank you.
Jasmine. Thank you for waking up
Thank
early.
you.
Thanks, Nicola.
Have a
Bye.
good day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.